Hi. This week has been a doozy for the Middle East. First, we had a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, and then we have a dramatic reversal of fortune for Syrian rebels. The Assad regime is on the run. Rebel groups have seized Aleppo, and Assad's forces, with the Iranian, Hezbollah, and Russian allies, appear to be at real risk of losing control of the country. These events are connected. But what's going on? What are we supposed to think about it? That's the subject of this present video. My name is Michael Shurkin, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Pax Americana, a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be in my mind. Let's begin with Lebanon. The ceasefire deal in Lebanon is a mixed bag. One thing is clear, though. Hezbollah has been soundly smashed by Israel. Not destroyed, regrettably. They're still there, but radically diminished in its strength. To this, we must add that Israel has successfully removed a large portion of Iran's deterrence capability, which largely relied on the threat that Hezbollah represented. Plus, Israel has demonstrated that it can hurt Iran far more than Iran can hurt Israel. This is all good. Hezbollah's defeat is synonymous with Iran's defeat. This is all good. It's proof that, frankly, war works. And any earlier ceasefire would have preserved Hezbollah's strength much more than is presently the case, and thereby preserved Iran's strength. That would be bad. Now, in the longer term, however, there's a lot to worry about. The ceasefire deal itself seems implausibly unwieldy and reliant on several things happening that probably won't. The ceasefire, most importantly, it gives Hezbollah an opportunity to rebuild, to reorganize, to get back on its feet. It can recover. It will recover. There will be another round to this fighting. There are disputed accounts that Biden imposed the ceasefire and threatened Israel in order to do so. Allegedly, the White House threatened to withhold arms shipments and also to withhold UN Security Council vetoes. Again, these are disputed. Amos Hochstein, who's been the point man on the negotiations for the Biden administration, has made very clear that this is not the case. And indeed, in his favor, the argument can be made that Netanyahu did not need to be forced to accept the ceasefire. There's some very strong reasons for him to do so. Netanyahu himself made a very good argument for it when he gave a speech about the ceasefire. This would allow Israel to focus more on Iran. This would allow the IDF to basically catch its breath and to reload, rearm, etc. Likewise, I can also see how spreading allegations about that Biden forced his hand would serve Netanyahu's interests. It would give him an element of cover vis-a-vis critics to his right. I suppose we're going to have to wait for historians to figure out exactly what, if anything, actually happened. Now, threat or no threat, it's certainly clear that Biden wanted a ceasefire badly. Why this was the case had a lot to do with what I've talked about in the past, about how for American governments often the imperative seems to be getting off the X, get out of a conflict, to de-escalate a conflict, rather than use the conflict or the crisis to benefit American interests. The question that Israelis are asking is why there's any reason to believe that the ceasefire will be enforced any more than the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 has been enforced. 1701, which is the basis of the new agreement, dates to 2006, the last Israel-Hezbollah war. The basic gist is that Hezbollah had to withdraw from the area between Lebanon's border with Israel, which is often referred to as the Blue Line, and the Litani River. This never happened. Hezbollah instead remained in place, and it amassed weapons, a gigantic arsenal, most of which Israel has now destroyed, and dug enormous tunnel works and fortifications. All of this under the nose of the inept and pointless United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, otherwise known as UNIFIL. UNIFIL, which was created in 1978, has been failing to keep the peace ever since. So there's no reason whatsoever to put any confidence in UNIFIL. Lebanon itself is really no stronger than it was in the past. The Lebanese army cannot impose its own control over Lebanese territory. France has talked its way onto the Oversight Committee for upholding the peace, the ceasefire. France, frankly, can't be trusted. One of these days, I need to do a separate article and a separate video about France's bizarre and anachronistic involvement in this part of the world. As for the United States, well, the United States has an almost infinite ability to disregard violations of any agreement, of any sort of red lines that it has drawn, if it suits it to do so. So can you really trust the United States? Well, perhaps more than the French, but, if it's your security on the line, how much confidence do you want to put in any of this? Really, the only real reason for optimism, certainly relative to 2006, is that in 2006, Israel did damage to Hezbollah, but not nearly as much damage as it did now. Also, Israel has also done a lot of damage to Iran itself and has done a lot to intimidate the Iranians. So now the deterrence factor has finally been reversed. from Israel being deterred to strike against Iran and Hezbollah. Now, one could argue that they've succeeded, Israel succeeded in restoring deterrence, so that Hezbollah and Iran are the ones who are deterred, and not vice versa. This is good. The bad thing is, so what that does mean is that Israel, at the very least, has won itself a respite from having to worry about Hezbollah. But a respite is not the end of hostilities. A respite also means that Hezbollah also can benefit from any time that it is gained in order to reorganize, to restock, to grow, to get back on its own feet, and to get back into the fight, and then to fight another round. And again, I am confident that there will be another round. As for what would end the hostilities, probably the best bet would be, unless Lebanon were to actually find it within itself to actually impose within its own territory a monopoly over the legitimate use of violence, which, to go back to Weber's classic argument about the legitimacy of a nation state. Unless that were to happen, the best chance for ending the hostilities is basically for an overthrow of Iran's government. If Iran's government falls, then, and if whatever succeeds Iran's government does not support Hezbollah, without Iranian support, would be far weaker and far smaller and far less potent. It would be impotent compared to anything that we have now. I think this would benefit, it certainly would benefit Israel. I think it'd benefit the whole world, and it would also benefit Lebanon. And it's been interesting to watch, by the way, the war through Lebanese Twitter and Lebanese social media, and also I've been reading a lot of Francophone Lebanese press. Quite a few Lebanese observers have basically been cheering the Israelis on, saying, go destroy Hezbollah. Hezbollah's been a nightmare for Lebanon. Quite a few, however, it's like they can't. It's almost like they're torn between their hatred of Hezbollah and their anti-Semitism. That's one factor. And then another factor for some of the Lebanese commentators is fear of what would happen if Hezbollah were to actually disappear. Because Hezbollah at least kind of helped put an end to sort of civil conflict within Lebanon. And the fear is that a diminished Hezbollah would create space for different other Lebanese factions to vie to fill the space, which means you're potentially back to a civil war scenario. And that would be really bad for Lebanon. Consequently, what a lot of Lebanese want is for Hezbollah to be taken down a few pegs, but not entirely taken off the board. Let's turn out to Syria. The collapsing stock of Hezbollah and Iran, I believe, are at the root of what's happened this week in Syria, with Syrian rebels breaking out of a really bad situation and seemingly completely reversing their fortunes and putting the Assad regime at risk of collapse. It's hard to know exactly what happened. Maybe Turkey, which is one of the backers of the rebels, basically said, you saw an opportunity thanks to Israel's drubbing of Hezbollah and Iran. Maybe the rebel themselves saw an opportunity. Perhaps they really always had it within themselves. They've had the means to actually do what they've done in the last week. But what they were lacking was the confidence that Hezbollah's weakening at Israel's hands has provided. But either way, they've gone and done it. Of course, the war's far from over, and it's one of these classic situations where it's not over till the fat lady sings. I don't know who said that and why they said that. It's a strange expression, but there you go. The challenge with Syria, though, and what makes Syria such a difficult thing to think about, is that it's a case where there are few clear examples of good guys. Like, everybody's a bad guy. To such an extent that often the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend doesn't really apply, because sometimes the enemy of my enemy is also my enemy. So what are you really going to do about it? To be very clear, Assad and his regime are absolutely evil. This is a murderous, horrible regime that has held on to power through massacre, torture, chemical weapons. The works. Really, really, really bad. There are a lot of Assad apologists out there on social media and in the press. You should treat all such people with scorn. The problem, however, is that, first of all, Assad's main enemies, or one of his main enemies in the past, let's say 15 years, has been Islamic State. And everybody agrees that Islamic State is actually worse than Assad's regime. Also, two, the anti-Assad rebels are themselves a motley coalition of actors with very diverse agendas and orientations, and they lack unity. Some of them, for example, would probably do really terrible things if given the opportunity. Quite a few are Islamists of various stripes, including affiliated with Al-Qaeda, although they say that they're no longer affiliated with Qaeda, but I don't really know what that means, to be honest, and everybody should greet such proclamations with real skepticism. While a lot of the people who criticize the Syrian rebels are clearly Assad apologists and thus should be treated with skepticism, often there's some truth to what they say. And more to the point, I know quite a few Syria commentators who very clearly are not Assad apologists, who also voice concern about the rebels and who wonder whether or not, is it really true that the rebels are the lesser of the evil? Again, I want to stress, if Assad's regime were to fall, and even if Assad were to die, do not cry for him. Shed no tears for this man or for his horrible, horrible regime. And of course, there's a lot of schadenfreude to be enjoyed at the prospect of his IRGC allies being hit, or Hezbollah being chased out, or the Russians being chased out. All of this is good, but there's just so much uncertainty about what happens after he falls. There could very well just be chaos, and if there's chaos, and actually the chaos would probably benefit Islamic State, which everybody agrees is worse than everybody else. Or maybe what would emerge is some sort of Islamist regime that might debatably be better than the Islamic State, probably better than Islamic State, but would it be worse than the Assad regime? I don't know. I suppose it depends on one's point of view. There could also be something else, something much more positive. It's just a roll of the dice. So it's just almost a question of, is it worth it to roll the dice? Do you prefer to embrace the uncertainty rather than to sort of want to stick with the status quo, which is absolutely dreadful? So is this a case where the devil is better than the devil you don't know? It seems to me like I'd rather gamble on the devil you don't know than the devil you know. But I also want to say that that it's complicated, and so it's something that should be viewed with apprehension. But again, if the Assad regime were to collapse and Assad were to be killed, do not cry for this man. That is really a net benefit, probably for humanity, but that doesn't mean that what happens afterwards necessarily is going to be a good thing, either for the Syrian people or for the rest of the world. The United States has chosen to support a Kurdish element amongst the anti-Assad forces, primarily because the Kurds have been excellent proxies in the war against Islamic State. That's basically why there are some U.S. troops there. It's because we're still fighting Islamic State. Also, I think there's some sense of obligation vis-a-vis Kurds, because the Kurds were, and still are our best allies in Iraq. We like Kurds. Not that much, not enough to actually help them gain independence anywhere, but still, we like Kurds. But of course, the U.S. administration has been very careful about how much help to give to Kurdish rebels in Syria. Why? Because helping the Kurds antagonizes Turkey, which also supports anti-Assad rebels and supports the fight against Islamic State, but also hates the Kurds. And Turkey associates the U.S.-backed Kurdish group in Syria with the PKK, which is the Turkish Kurdish group that's been fighting an insurgency against the Turkish government on and off since 1978. I should add that both Turkey and the United States have labeled PKK to be a terrorist organization. It's complicated. American hesitations about Syrian rebels does go a long way to explain why Obama never enforced the now infamous red line that he drew about Assad's use of chemical weapons, and why our support for Kurds or other groups, I mean, you hear rumors and you hear stories, has always been kind of so tentative and almost half-hearted, because it's like we can't make up our minds and we can't decide to throw the dice. It's like, ugh. So, the sense of risk has outweighed our sense of any real opportunity. They're not alone, though. The United States is not alone in this. I mean, it's also been clear that Israel also seems to have favored a perpetual civil war to any of the particular sides in Syria actually winning, out of an uncertainty about what that victory might look like, which rebels, and whether or not those rebels would actually be better than the Assad regime. Consequently, since the war began, which was 2011, the civil war, the Israelis have basically been on the sidelines watching and worrying, but not actually doing anything. Israeli strikes against targets in Syria, which have sometimes included strikes against the Assad regime, ultimately, though, have had as their purpose weakening Hezbollah and impeding Hezbollah's ability to smuggle weapons from Iran into Lebanon, rather than weakening Assad's regime. It's pretty clear to me that if Israel wanted to take down Assad's regime, it absolutely could. If it wanted to weaken Assad's regime, it absolutely could. but it really hasn't. It's been very careful about what it's done, targeting more Hezbollah and Hezbollah's ability to do bad things in Lebanon. So what exactly does America want? What should we want? Well, America wants Assad to be weak, but America isn't sure if it wants Assad to fail or to fall. We want the Kurds to thrive, but America is kind of concerned that maybe the Kurds might thrive too much. We sympathize with Syrian rebels, but worry about them. We don't want chaos, which would create a new opportunity for an opening for Islamic State. We appreciate Turkish help, but don't want to see Turkey impose its own imperium, especially given Turkey's propensity for supporting Islamists, particularly Islamists amongst the Syrian rebels. We like to see Russians get hurt. That's fine. That's like a win. But none of this altogether, though, really lends itself to any real clear positive vision for Syria's future beyond wishing out loud for some sort of negotiated settlement in which everybody just agrees to stop fighting. Honestly, I think that it's far too late for that. There's much too much bad blood among Syria's many warring factions for them to just get along. Somebody's going to have to win this war, or the war will just kind of continue in perpetuity. And then it's just a question of whatever happens, whether or not that serves American interests or Israel's interests or the interests of the Syrian people. The Syrian people, it's clear that the Syrians themselves have been the greatest victims of all of this. And for their sake, I hope that something positive comes out of the current situation. For their sake, I want there to be a peace. Time will tell. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Also, if you have any feelings, thoughts, please comment in the comment section below. And in my description of the video, I've also added links to my Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn, as well as by Substack, Pax Americana, the same name, and my website, michaelsharkin.com. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.